Dan is a quiet 19-year-old college student who works part-time at a bookstore. He doesn't have many friends and spends most of his time reading and studying. One rainy afternoon, Dan is walking home with his umbrella when a strong wind pulls it from his hand. The umbrella flies across the parking lot and scratches the side of an expensive black car. Dan feels terrible. He doesn't have much money, but he knows the right thing to do is leave a note. He writes, "I'm so sorry I scratched your car. It was an accident with my umbrella. I will pay for the damage. Please call me." He adds his phone number and tucks the note under the windshield wiper. The car belongs to Baek-hyeon, a 32-year-old Korean CEO who runs a powerful business that most people don't know is connected to dangerous underground work. Baek-hyeon is known for being cold, serious, and someone you don't want to make angry. When he finds the note, he's surprised. Most people would have run away, but this person took responsibility. Baek-hyeon calls Dan that same evening. Dan's heart pounds with fear as he answers. But instead of yelling, Baek-hyeon's voice is calm. "Meet me at the Golden Dragon restaurant tomorrow at 6 p.m. We'll discuss how you'll pay for this." Dan agrees even though he's scared. At the restaurant, Dan meets Baek-hyeon for the first time. Baek-hyeon is handsome, wearing an expensive suit, and has a commanding presence. Dan feels small next to him. Baek-hyeon studies Dan carefully and says, "The repair costs $3,000. Can you pay?" Dan's face goes pale. He doesn't have that kind of money. I can pay you back slowly," Dan stammers. "I work at a bookstore. I can give you money every month." Baek-hyeon leans back in his chair, thinking. Then he makes an unexpected offer. "Work for me instead. Come to my office building after your bookstore job ends. Help organize files, clean, do simple tasks. Work for 3 months and we'll call it even." Dan doesn't know what kind of business Baek-hyeon runs, but he needs to pay off his debt. He agrees. Over the next few weeks, Dan works at Baek-hyeon's office building every evening. He starts noticing strange things. Men in dark suits coming and going at odd hours, secret meetings, locked rooms. But Dan keeps his head down and does his work. Baek-hyeon watches Dan carefully. He notices how honest and hardworking Dan is, how he never complains, and how he treats everyone with kindness even when they're rude to him. Slowly, Baek-hyeon finds himself looking forward to seeing Dan each evening. One night, Dan stays late to finish organizing a storage room. Baek-hyeon brings him tea and they talk for the first time about things other than work. Dan tells Baek-hyeon about his dream of becoming a writer. Baek-hyeon shares a little about growing up in Korea and moving to America to build his business. Something shifts between them that night. When their hands accidentally touch while reaching for the same box, both of them feel a spark neither expected. As weeks turn into months, Dan and Baek-hyeon grow closer. Baek-hyeon starts finding excuses for Dan to stay longer at the office. They share meals together, talk about their lives, and slowly, a deep friendship forms. Dan makes Baek-hyeon laugh in ways he hasn't in years. Baek-hyeon makes Dan feel seen and valued for the first time in his life. One evening, after Dan finishes his 3 months of work, Baek-hyeon tells him, "Your debt is paid. You're free to go." But then he adds quietly, "But I'd like you to stay. Not as payment. As someone I want around." Dan's heart races. "I'd like that too," he whispers. They begin spending all their free time together. Baek-hyeon takes Dan to nice restaurants, museums, and quiet places where they can talk for hours. Dan brings light and warmth into Baek-hyeon's dark, serious world. One night, under the stars in Baek-hyeon's private garden, they share their first kiss. Both of them feel like they've finally found something real and precious. Dan knows Baek-hyeon runs a complicated business, but Baek-hyeon keeps the dangerous details hidden. "I want to protect you from that part of my life," Baek-hyeon says. Dan trusts him. But everything changes when Dan meets Minjun, Baek-hyeon's business partner and closest friend since childhood. Minjun is charming and friendly to Dan at first, but Dan notices how Minjun watches them with cold, calculating eyes. Minjun is secretly jealous. He's been in love with Baek-hyeon for years but never said anything. Seeing Baek-hyeon happy with Dan fills Minjun with bitter anger. Minjun decides to destroy their relationship. Minjun creates a cruel plan. He hires someone to attack Dan one night when Dan is walking home from the bookstore. The attacker doesn't hurt Dan badly, just scares him and steals his bag. Later, Minjun pretends to be concerned and tells Dan, "You're in danger because of Baek-hyeon's enemies. They know you're important to him. Baek-hyeon won't keep you safe, he only cares about his business." Dan is shaken but doesn't fully believe Minjun. However, Minjun doesn't stop there. He creates fake evidence, altered photos and messages that make it look like Baek-hyeon has been using Dan to get information about a rival business owner that Dan's uncle works for. Minjun shows these to Dan, saying, Baek-hyeon never loved you. He was using you from the beginning. The scratch on the car? He planned it all. Dan's heart breaks into pieces. When he confronts Baek-hyeon, Baek-hyeon is confused and tries to explain, but the fake evidence looks too real. Dan, hurt and scared, refuses to listen. I trusted you. Dan shouts with tears streaming down his face. I thought you were different. But you're just like everyone else who's ever hurt me. Baek-hyeon is devastated, but his pride won't let him beg. If you can't trust me, then maybe you should go, he says coldly, hiding his own broken heart. Dan leaves that night. He moves to a different part of the city and quits all contact with Baek-hyeon. He tries to move on with his life, but the pain follows him everywhere. Meanwhile, Minjun tells Baek-hyeon lies too, that Dan was actually a spy sent by enemies and that Dan never really loved him. Baek-hyeon, hurt and angry, believes Minjun because Minjun has been his trusted friend for so long. Both Dan and Baek-hyeon are miserable, kept apart by Minjun's lies. 6 months pass. Dan has tried to rebuild his life, but he can't forget Baek-hyeon. He still loves him even though he believes Baek-hyeon betrayed him. Dan has become sadder and quieter, just going through the motions of living. One day, Dan meets Soo-yeon, a young woman who used to work for Baek-hyeon but quit because she disagreed with some of the business practices. Dan and Soo-yeon become friends when they both reach for the same book at a library. During one of their conversations, Soo-yeon mentions Minjun. That man is dangerous, she says. I never trusted him when I worked there. He's obsessed with Baek-hyeon and would do anything to keep others away from him. Something clicks in Dan's mind. He starts asking questions and Soo-yeon reveals that she saw Minjun meeting with the person who attacked Dan. She didn't think much of it at the time, but now the pieces start fitting together. Dan investigates further. He's scared but determined to find the truth. With Soo-yeon's help, he tracks down the man who attacked him. After some convincing and offering him money, the man admits that Minjun paid him to scare Dan and make it look like Baek-hyeon's enemies did it. Dan's blood runs cold. Everything was a lie. Minjun destroyed their relationship on purpose. Dan knows he needs to expose Minjun, but he also needs proof that Baek-hyeon wasn't using him. Soo-yeon helps Dan break into Minjun's computer files, using skills she learned from her time in the business. They find everything: the fake messages Minjun created, his plans written in digital notes, even recordings of Minjun talking about his jealousy and schemes. Armed with the truth, Dan must decide what to do. He's angry at Baek-hyeon for not fighting harder for their relationship, but he also understands that Baek-hyeon was hurt and deceived too. Dan goes to Baek-hyeon's office building late one night. His hands shake as he walks through the familiar hallways. When he enters Baek-hyeon's office, Baek-hyeon looks up, shocked. Baek-hyeon looks tired and sad, like he hasn't been sleeping well. Dan? Baek-hyeon's voice is rough with emotion. I found the truth, Dan says quietly. He shows Baek-hyeon all the evidence of Minjun's betrayal. As Baek-hyeon reads through everything, his expression changes from confusion to anger to heartbreak. Minjun did this? My oldest friend. He was jealous, Dan explains. He's been in love with you and couldn't stand seeing you happy with me. Baek-hyeon's hands clench into fists. But then he looks at Dan with eyes full of regret. I should have trusted you. I should have believed in what we had instead of letting my hurt and pride push you away. I'm so sorry, Dan. Dan's own eyes fill with tears. I'm sorry too. I should have given you a chance to really explain. They hold each other for a long time, both crying, both healing from the... But they still need to deal with Minjun. Together they plan their revenge, not with violence but with justice. They gather everyone important in Baek-hyeon's organization for a meeting. In front of everyone, Baek-hyeon presents all the evidence of Minjun's betrayal and schemes. Minjun tries to lie his way out, but the evidence is too strong. Baek-hyeon strips Minjun of his position and partnership. You're finished here, Baek-hyeon says coldly. You betrayed not just me but someone innocent who never did anything to you. You let your jealousy destroy something beautiful. Now you have nothing. Minjun is forced to leave in shame. The people who worked with him turn their backs on him. His reputation is ruined, and the power he craved is completely gone. In the weeks that follow, Dan and Baek-hyeon work on rebuilding their relationship. They go slowly this time, being honest about their fears and feelings. Baek-hyeon opens up completely about his business, and together they work on making it more legitimate and less dangerous. Dan starts writing seriously and Baek-hyeon supports his dream fully. Baek-hyeon even uses his connections to help Dan get his first story published. 1 year after they reunite, Baek-hyeon takes Dan back to the parking lot where everything started, where the umbrella scratched the car. That scratch was the best thing that ever happened to me, Baek-hyeon says, holding Dan's hand. It brought you into my life. Even with all the pain? Dan asks. Even with all the pain, Baek-hyeon confirms. Because it taught us both that real love is worth fighting for. And now we're stronger together than we ever were apart. Dan smiles, his heart finally at peace. I love you. I love you too, Baek-hyeon whispers. Always. They kiss as the sun sets, two people who found each other by accident, lost each other through betrayal, and fought their way back through truth and forgiveness. Their story isn't perfect, but it's real. And that's all that matters.